Joining us now on the program is our state senator representing the 13th District in the Michigan Senate. Rosemary Bayer joins us today on the program. Senator Bayer, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
Yeah, glad to have you on with us as tonight will be 3 weeks since the mass shooting at Michigan State University, in which 3 students were killed and 5 additional students were hospitalized, 2 of which remain in Sparrow Hospital System at this time after good news on Friday that 2 additional students out of the 5 had been discharged from Sparrow. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, there was so much call to action, as there always is in these cases, from the community, from legislature members, as well as others that were directly affected by these shootings. So in the 3 weeks since, what has been the discussion in Lansing, in your caucus and across the aisle as well, about addressing mass shootings?
Well, I would say that in the 15 months since the shooting in Oxford, we actually got a lot more active and pushed harder and harder to introduce some firearm safety legislation. When last November, after the election, we had a suspicion that we might have an opportunity to actually move some legislation forward in this space under the new leadership in the House and Senate. So we started working on updating some of the fundamental pieces of legislation that other states are using all across the country to actually build some firearm safety, some protections into Michigan law. So we started in November. We had a schedule that was a little bit longer than the one we're working on now. As much as we have had shootings around the state, all over the place, individual shootings that don't get as much attention. When the Michigan State shooting happened, there was so much pressure and so much momentum and so much concern by everyone that we started to accelerate what we were doing. So moving up our schedule a little bit, just basically pushing harder to get things done faster. And so we introduced the 3 different sets of bills a little over a week ago, and are now going through the hearings process and moving to voting soon, hopefully before the end of the month, but soon.
And so often when these unfortunate events happen, and now in the last 15 months, really unfortunately twice have happened right here in the state of Michigan, affecting people all across our local area. When that happens, the reaction tends to be, as it should be, very emotional, very visceral for our communities. And they're calling for action. They want that action immediately to prevent these kinds of situations from coming up in the future, again, even just months away from when they had happened previously. But unfortunately, with the way that our government works, these processes aren't really able to take things on immediately. It takes time. So with that being the case, and what you've already discussed with three bills already in the circuit as it is, when can the people expect that maybe some of these bills may go through the process they need to go through and become law in Michigan?
Luckily, we had the base bills prepared that have been reintroduced every 2 years for the last 8 years or so. We took those starting in November and started a whole new round of input from stakeholders, getting people involved from the national groups, the national firearm safety groups like Giffords and Brady's and those folks, Everytown. We started working with our local organizations, the sheriffs, the police chiefs, the state police, the attorney general's office, all the different stakeholders that are involved in this kind of work, and getting their input now to update those bills. So we started in November. Like I said, we were planning to hopefully get them to a vote maybe the end of April. So after Michigan State happened, we just started pushing really hard on those reviewers, those groups that we were getting input from, to make sure that we are doing all the right things, and pushed the date forward as much as possible. So maybe we will be able to do this by the end of March. That's our current goal, where we are in the process. We introduced the bills. We've had hearings. We've had 1 hearing in the Senate, 1 hearing in the House of Representatives, and then we anticipate 1 more hearing this week in each of those 2 houses. And at that point, We feel like we should have all the feedback that we need. We should have the final inputs from different organizations and ready to actually take those bills to the House and Senate floor to vote on. So our hope is before the end of March, but we can never commit because we don't know. And then the last step is the governor will take the bills that pass both the House and Senate, and we're feeling confident. I mean, we're not going to get overconfident, but we're feeling confident that we'll be able to pass them now. And the governor has already expressed her willingness to sign the bills. So hopefully that sticks and we get them all done this spring.
We're joined by Senator Rosemary Bayer on today's edition of the Megacast, a Michigan State Senator from the 13th District, joining us on the program. And Senator Bayer, with addressing mass shootings, typically it tends to be those in the Democratic caucus that are more eager to address the issue from the standpoint of gun violence and gun safety legislation. But how much bipartisan support has there been in this effort, if any, as your caucus and others have brought forth legislation to the Senate as well as to the House?
I think it's building. I will say that there are a couple of Republicans who have said they're joining our firearm safety caucus, which is a group of legislators from both the House and the Senate coming together, working on this. So we'll have some Republican representation there. Hopefully more will come along as they understand better what we're actually doing, the bills that we are proposing. We are very carefully taking input from different gun groups. We're looking at making sure that we're protecting our hunters, the things that happen in Michigan, right? We're getting at violence that is outside of the normal things that happen here if you're a hunter. So when we ask people, do you think we should have a universal background check? So instead of just doing a background check for handguns, the first set of bills will check on long guns as well, which makes sense. Why would you not do that? And over 90% of the people in Michigan, and that includes Republicans and gun owners, have agreed that that is something that we should do. So that's the first set of bills. The second set is what you would call child access protection. And so when you talk about the things that happen, where our kids get a hold of a firearm and, whatever, accidentally shoot their dad, accidentally shoot themselves. I mean, all kinds of bad things happen when people do not store their firearms securely. That's what that does. It says store it securely. If a minor gets a hold of it and hurts themselves or someone else, the owner is going to be held responsible. That seems very practical. It doesn't take your gun away. And the third one, while we talk a lot about mass shootings, and this does have an impact, the main efficacy of the extreme risk protection orders, otherwise known as red flag bills, is really about suicide more than anything else. And states that have these set of bills enacted, there's about 20 states around the country that do this now, they are seeing a notable reduction in suicide up to 17%. And when you consider that most firearm deaths are suicide, almost 2/3 are suicide, and most people who attempt suicide with a gun are successful, whereas most other methods fail, this is the number one impact to have on firearm death in our country. So with these three sets of bills, we're reaching out for the child access issue, right? The thing that happens when kids get a hold of guns. This would have made a difference in Oxford. On the red flag issue, which likely would have made a difference in Michigan State, as far as we can tell from the outside. I will say we have not that close to it, but it's really designed mostly for suicide prevention and makes a big difference. So we know that, and all three of these poll well in Michigan, all three of them poll over 80%, including Republicans, including gun owners. So we know we're doing the right thing here with these three sets of gun safety bills.
Senator Rosemary Bayer joins us from Michigan's 13th District on today's edition of the Megacast. Senator Bayer, as we talk about the issue of gun violence, as we talk about the issue of mass shootings, the argument from across the aisle tends to be it's not just a gun issue, it's also a mental health issue. And it's a very valid point, too. We look at the Oxford High School shooting. This was a teenager that was clearly in a lot of distress, that was not properly being addressed. And same thing in the case of Michigan State. This 43-year-old man, his father had reported that he was in quite a state of distress since the death of his mother. So in terms of legislative response in that regard, what is being done to address mental health at the statewide level that can also play a key factor in a lot of these acts of violence, whether they are mass shootings or individual acts of violence too?
And that is literally what the extreme risk protection orders,
Yeah.
why they're so effective, is it gives the family member an opportunity to do something when they know that this person they care about could be at risk of hurting themselves or someone else. So it does directly go to that issue. Now, that being said, one of the things that we're still lacking in Michigan is the opportunity, the money, the time to rebuild a mental health system that was taken apart some decades ago in our state. So we have started investing in that. In this current governor's term, and with Governor Whitmer, last year alone, we invested $380 million in building a new state mental health hospital. We are putting hundreds of millions of dollars into local mental health community agencies. In Oakland County, we have the Common Ground, we have Easter Seals, we have the Community Mental Health Network. Other counties have similar situations, so we're funding those groups as much as possible. We're putting hundreds of millions of dollars into schools to provide mental health supports for students as well as staff. And then the other piece that is really critical right now for all of us is on those first responders who really take a lot of the stress and strain of managing our environment these days, making sure that they have access to mental health. So we are building up this new system that we just haven't had for a long time. I think we all recognize that it's a real sore spot for us here in Michigan, and we're doing the right thing to invest there.
And another argument that does come up, and it's another very valid point, is we can put all these laws in place that make it tougher for people that should not have guns to get access to guns, and make it that much tougher for those. In that case, for those people that shouldn't have guns to commit these acts of violence, but ultimately criminals that want to commit acts of violence with guns, people that want to do something as horrific as what happened at Oxford or at Michigan State, they still have some avenues beyond the law to make that happen. So in your consultation, because this is such a multi-departmental effort in the wake of mass shootings and to prevent mass shootings, whether it be from the federal level, from the FBI and the ATF, to locally, as you mentioned earlier, Oakland County Sheriff's Office and the state police, has there been discussion too about expanding the tools that are in place for our state police, for our local law enforcement also, to work on getting some of these illegal guns that may be out there in our communities off the streets too, which can also play factors in these individual acts of gun violence as well?
Yeah. So there are some programs in place that are been kind of revved back up, the buyback programs. We have also one of the things that has the most impact on the violence overall in the community, in particular the gun violence, has to do with intervention and prevention programs. So one of the things that the governor has proposed for her new budget this year, and that we actually just voted to pull the funding forward so we can start now instead of next year, is a public health office of violence intervention, so that we can focus. We've been able to do some pilots across the state over the last few years, and it really makes a big difference in places that we've tried it. Everything from in my district, where we had 3 kind of suburban communities working together, to more urban environments like Grand Rapids and other places where we've been trying these intervention strategies, and they have an effect that is just tremendous, and generally fairly quickly too, to be able to actually see the impact. So we're working on both fronts, trying to look at our community structure as a whole and how do we do those things, and then working, again, with the national organizations to stay on top of any interventions that help with. So we have some proposed legislation, for example, that make it illegal to have ghost guns, where people will print firearms and they have guns without serial numbers, so there's no way to track them. Just having universal background checks gives us the opportunity to actually track firearms when they come in. I mean, often they start legal and they end up illegal, but it makes it easier to find them and take care of that if we're actually tracking all of them, not just a certain kind. So there's a lot of different avenues that we're working on for this issue, because we know it's a big one and it spans all kinds of situations.
It's a complicated issue, and it's going to take a lot of efforts in a number of different areas in order to maybe not necessarily resolve the issue of gun violence and mass shootings here in Michigan and across the U.S., but at least take some of those numbers down and prevent some, if not all, of these situations from happening. Joining us on the program today is Senator Rosemary Bayer from Michigan's 13th District in the state Senate. In the wake of the shooting at Michigan State University just a little over a week later, you participated in a town hall right here in West Bloomfield, where we originate our program, with State Representative Noah Arbit and U.S. Representative Haley Stevens on the issue of gun violence and other issues affecting our state and our nation as well. And these discussions continue in the wake of this mass shooting, and certainly in the wake just a little over a year ago of the shooting at Oxford High School, where at that time in your previous term you were their state senator in that district as well. What is the pulse of the community in the area you represent now and in the areas you've represented previously in very recent history on this issue, and what they really want to see happen at the state level and beyond to prevent tragedies like what happened locally here in Oxford and even more more recently at Michigan State?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, during the last year, we ran for office, right? We all ran for reelection, and my team and I, we knocked on 40,000 doors. And what we do when we go visit people, because we do it all the time, we don't just do it for election. We knock on the door and we say hi, and we ask them what's important. What do you think we should be working on? And always, gun violence was one of the top two things. It was either first or second in every single conversation this came up. So we know people are demanding us to do something about this. It's just so long overdue. And when I talk to my people in Oxford, when I talk to all my friends, I lived up there for a long time. So most of my friends, many of my friends are up there, and I still get involved in the community. They too, as much as I lived in North Oakland, I grew up in North Macomb. Everybody hunts. Everybody has firearms. It's a thing in Michigan, right? We have a lot of hunting, and it's normal. All of them want us to do something about this. None of them want this to continue to have our kids be afraid at school. So, it's time. We're overdue at fixing this, and the people of Michigan are telling us to do our job. So here we go. We're trying to do our job now.
And you've had continued consultation, as you said, with those in Oxford directly affected by that shooting, with those locally that were affected by the shooting at Michigan State University in East Lansing just 3 weeks ago, the evening of Monday, February 13th, just after 8 o'clock at 8:18 when that shooting began. And recently, even you've had some discussions with representatives from March for Our Lives, which of course was formed in the wake of the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. What's being done from the statewide level too to address what the needs are for the victims of these shootings, those that have been traumatized by experiencing a mass shooting, experiencing multiple mass shootings, as we've heard many stories of from the Michigan State shooting just recently? What's being done from the state of Michigan's point of view to support the victims of these crimes?
Yeah. Well, we have certainly done everything we can to pour resources into both of those school environments as things happened, making sure that every student there, every teacher, anyone there actually. In Oxford, we still have extra supports. We've got funding through the federal government for a resilience center there. We poured in mental health supports, therapy dogs that are still there. Same thing with Michigan State, all the supporting structure to help the students and the people who work there and the people who live there get through the trauma of this. It doesn't just go away. It tends to stay. I am a victim myself, a survivor, I should say myself, of gun violence, and recognize that the trauma of it actually never leaves you. It's just about how do you cope, where do you put that, and how do you carry on and move forward. And so for us, supporting that as much as we can, making sure that the schools get the resources they need. Each one of our schools around the state now gets a safety budget where they get to decide what's the right thing for their school. A lot of schools often are opting for things like gunpowder sniffing dogs and things like that, not necessarily armed guards. There's a lot of different ways to, make it feel safer at school. And we're setting it up so that we have set it up so that the schools get to make their own choices about that. So that will continue probably for a very long time. I don't know.
Senator Bayer, before we let you go, I do want to give you another couple minutes to say anything else that we haven't discussed on this issue that would be important for our local audience to know and for your constituents to know about what's being done at the statewide level to address some of the issues that lead and factor in to mass shootings.
Thanks. Yeah, I would just remind people that, there is gun violence every day in our state. It's not just the one that just happened 2 weeks ago or the one that happened 15 months ago. It happens every day and every day across the country. It is the largest cause of death for children. The number one cause of death for children and young adults now is gun violence. So it's time for us to do something to fix this. We're doing it very carefully. We could use your support. Call your representatives, call your state senators, and tell them that you want them to vote for this as it comes up on the floor in both the House and the Senate. We could use your help on that. We will continue to go forward. If you know people who are at risk for themselves or others, you will have more options to get them help. As it is now, though, call the mental health hotline. It is 411. That's all you have to do. And you will get help for them. They can get help for themselves. So just wanted to leave you with that message at the end too. There's always something we can do to help.
The best way to keep the pulse of the community with your representatives, both in the state house and the state senate and federally at the federal level as well, is to call your local representatives. You can call Senator Bayer's office at 517-373-2417, 517-373-2417 for more information and to discuss with her staff what you'd like to see done right here in Michigan for Oakland County. Senator Bayer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a great conversation.